everybody, it's Mr. Han, and this is the final installment on our series on methods. So what I wanted to do today was show us how to create methods that return values to our main program. These can be useful because sometimes what we need is a value that we need to do further work on, and we've seen this before. We've seen string methods that return values to our main program. We've seen math methods like random that return a random integer to our main program that we can then use later on in our program for some other computations. So the first one I want to start with is this square value method. And what it does is it takes in this integer a, and what it's going to do is it's going to multiply a by itself, so return the square value of it, and it's going to return an answer to the user in the main program. And the way it accomplishes this is by putting in the method declaration here this integer return type. So what that says to the program and to the user is that we're anticipating an answer coming back from this. You need to have a way of storing this in your main program or outputting it in your main program. So let's go ahead and run the code. I'm going to turn on my call to the method. There it is, square the value. I'm going to pass it 6, so I'm looking for 36 as my answer. I'm going to hit play. Nothing happens. Why is that? Well, what this method does is it returns an answer, and I'm storing it in my answer, but it's just stored there. There's no way for it to get out to the screen. So now my main method, I'm going to create a system.out to display that value, and I'm going to hit play, and there's my answer. That was good, and that was a pretty simple example. But let's try to find something that's maybe a little more real world. So oftentimes for grade 10, 11, 12 students, they have to solve quadratic equations. The quadratic equation is cumbersome, it's very difficult to do, and it's very time consuming. It would be great if we could create a computer program that would solve this for us. And so that's what I've gone ahead and done here. I've created a quadratic equation solver. And the quadratic equation solver, what it does is it takes in values, a, b, and c from the quadratic equation, and then returns the answers. Now, we know the quadratic equation gives us two answers, b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all divided by 2a. So we get two answers, but we can't return two answers. We can only have one return type. And so this is where we can start to see the power of arrays. We can only return one thing. We could return an array with two elements in it to get those two answers, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to call it the roots. Those are the two answers that you get from the quadratic equation. So my first answer in element 0 will be that positive answer, and my second element in element number 1 there will be the negative answer. So I break open that plus or minus into two separate calculations, two separate answers. And then I just create the quadratic equation here in my formula, and then I'm going to return that entire array called the roots. So let's run this now. So we come up to our main program. What I've done is created a double array called quadratic answer. It's 2 elements long. The quadratic answer will be the quadratic equation solver when I pass it to -6 and -8. If you're doing some quick factoring in your head, you already know what the answers are going to be. I need a way to display both of those answers. I'm going to display them on separate lines, and I'm going to hit play. So if you did the factoring, you would have known that the answers are 4 and -1. So our quadratic solver has worked, and you can see how this would be very beneficial when you have repeated calculations of this nature. It's better to have the computer doing the work than us doing the work and programming it every single time. As you can see, the equation, even typing it out in the computer, is very cumbersome, a lot of brackets. You got to be very careful with the signs. So once you get this down once, it's nice to be able to repeat that code. And that's what makes code modular, and that's the benefit of using methods. So hopefully this is helpful with this week's assignment. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me.